In this video, I want to discuss some of the issues in international trade. Now, international trade is based on the concept that some countries have an advantage in the production of some goods, whereas other countries have an advantage in the production of other goods. And this certainly makes sense. I mean, countries have different natural resources, they have different workforces that have different skill sets. Even within a country's borders, different parts of the country may have an advantage in the production of certain goods. For example, take the United States, which is a very large country. Orange production generally takes place in places that are very warm, such as Florida or California, because it's a warm weather fruit. It needs a very warm climate to grow. Now, could Minnesota produce oranges? Well, yeah, they probably could. And they could by building facilities that had the right climate inside, but this would be very expensive. They'd have to build the facility, they'd have to heat it, provide the correct humidity. It's a lot better to produce those oranges in Florida where the temperature and the climate is conducive to orange production. So it makes more sense for people in Minnesota to buy oranges from Florida than it is to try and produce them in Minnesota. Okay, the same concept holds true for international trade, for different countries. Some countries have lumber. Some countries have natural gas and oil. Some countries have certain minerals that can produce steel or other types of products. All right. Other countries just don't have those, so they're not going to be as efficient. So let's take a look at some of these concepts. Basically, international trade takes place because of an advantage. And there are a couple of definitions of advantage. One is referred to as absolute advantage. And one way to define absolute advantage is country A has an absolute advantage in the production of good X over good B if it can produce more of good X using the same amount of resources as country B. That's attributed to the famed economist Adam Smith. There's also another concept referred to as comparative advantage. Country A has a comparative advantage in the production of good X over country B if it is relatively more efficient at the production of good X than country B. And this is attributed to another famed economist, David Ricardo. Let's take a look at some numbers which might make it a little bit clearer. Here's an example. Consider the following table of car and truck production for country A and B. And this is the maximum of output that each country can produce. So it's not exactly my definition where I said the same amount of resources. This is another way you can define absolute advantage, but we can illustrate it here. Country A can produce 30 million cars if it uses all its resources in car production, or 6 million trucks. Country B can produce 35 million cars, or 21 million trucks. So by simply looking at the table, we can see that country B has an absolute advantage in the production of both cars and trucks. That is, they can produce more of both. However, country A has a comparative advantage in the production of cars, and country B has a comparative advantage in truck production. Let's see why this is so. Country B is 3.5 times better at truck production. If we look over here, they can produce 21 million trucks, where country B can only produce, country B can produce 21 million trucks. Country A can only produce 6 million. That's 3.5 times better. They're only 1.17 times better at car production, 35 divided by 30. So they're a little bit better at car production. They're a lot better at truck production. So it would make sense that there could be some gains from trade. But before we do that, let's see what happens if each country decided to produce both trucks and cars and devote essentially half its resources to each. Now, in order to understand this, let's take a look at the production possibility frontier. This shows how they can trade off car and truck production. We're going to assume this is a sort of straight line trade-off. You may have seen these production possibility frontiers in microeconomics that are curved or concave, but we're just going to have a straight line trade-off here. So in this case, country A can produce 6 million trucks or 30 million cars. Country B can produce 21 million trucks or 35 million cars. And you can see they have different slopes. Okay, there's a different trade-off there. If they had the same slope, there would be no gains from trade. But here there is a gain from trade. So what we can see from the production possibility frontier is that if country A wants to produce one more truck, they have to give up 5 cars. That is, the slope of that line is negative 1/5. If country B gives up the production of 5 cars, it can produce 3 more trucks, a slope of negative 3/5. So here I've drawn a little table here showing you the trade-off. So these two columns here represent A. They can produce 0 cars, 6 trucks, okay, 5 cars and 5 trucks, all the way down to 30 cars and 0 trucks, okay, or they could have 25 cars and 1 truck, etc. Over for B, if they focus only on truck production, they can produce 21 trucks. If they give up 5 cars, they can get, or if they want to produce 5 more cars, they have to give up 3 trucks in production, etc., etc. Okay, so they could produce 3 trucks and 30 cars, so on and so on. So let's take a look at this graph here. Okay, if country A focuses right in the middle, they could produce 15 cars and 3 trucks. All right, for country B, and this isn't quite exactly in the middle, but this is the example we're going to use here. If they give up 9, if they produce 9 less trucks, we know that for every 3 they give up, they can produce 5 more cars. They're going to produce 15 cars. So they're both going to produce 15 cars. They're going to be 12 trucks produced by country B and 3 trucks produced by country A. So the total output here is 45 million. All right, but if we look at this table again, I've picked some different spots. Suppose they decide to specialize a little bit. Suppose A says, look, we're only going to produce cars. We're not going to produce any trucks. So they produce 30 cars, 0 trucks. Over here, we're going to have B focusing on producing 5 cars and 18 trucks. So the total truck production is going to be 18 plus 0, and the total car production is going to be 30 plus 5, 35. So what do we see here? We see that if they change their production, country A chooses to produce only cars and it can produce 30 cars. If country B chooses to produce 18 trucks, it now can produce 5 cars. So what do we have here? We have total output of 53 million. And here the countries are able to produce both more cars and more trucks. So there are real gains from international trade, specializing in what you produce better, what you're more efficient at, and then trading with other countries. All right, and this is why this has benefited, basically the whole world. Imagine that, Japan had to produce its own oil or coal, okay, or its own forests for lumber, okay. Probably not as good at producing lumber as, for example, Canada is, which has a lot of forests. So, there's a big advantage to doing that. Or back to my previous example of Minnesota trying to produce oranges. Much better to focus on what you do more efficiently and trading with other countries. So these are the basic concepts of why international trade is considered beneficial